Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Some refer to the seasonal slowdown as summer doldrums. In fact, doldrum is an old-style maritime term that describes calm prevailing winds. So maybe we need more vacation and less vocation right now. Happy summer and welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs, covering the Carolinas for 27 years. I'm Chris William. And even with our toes in the sand, the beat of business does thump on. But what are those issues that still matter? We'll discuss and define some how insiders see these things. And later on, Colonial Life Chief Executive Officer Tim Arnold joins our dialogue.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Linda Brown from the Asheboro Randolph Chamber of Commerce, Brent Nelsen of Furman University, and special guest Tim Arnold, President and CEO of Colonial Life.
Hello, welcome again to our program. Happy summer. Does it feel like doldrums to you?
A little.
Okay. Dr. Nelsen, welcome to the program. Need to disclaim here, and it's certainly more than appropriate, that Brent Nelsen chairs the ETV, South Carolina ETV board, and ETV carries this program. So the authority of South Carolina ETV is the board of which you chair. Right. But I'm assuming we can all be grown up enough to handle that. So Brent, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Brent, you are more than just a casual political observer. You're on the faculty at Furman University. You know something about politics and public policy, et cetera, et cetera. When you witnessed in June some surprising results from the primary elections, what does it say about what is going to happen in the general election in the fall in South Carolina?
Well, first of all, those results showed that the Republican Party is now the Trump Party. And anybody who tries to distance themselves at all from the president, and we saw this in Mark Sanford's defeat in the 1st District, the congressional district in the Charleston area. He was not very far from the president, but he had at least rhetorically distanced himself a little bit and received the ire, the punishment of the electorate, at least the GOP primary electorate. And I think you see that across the board, not just in South Carolina, but in the rest of the country. So the general election is, at least in part, going to be a referendum on the Trump presidency. And we're going to see whether there is, in fact, some sort of blue wave. There was a large increase in Democratic voter participation in the primaries. Will that affect South Carolina politics? Will that affect the result of the general election? I'm not quite sure I'm ready to go that far, but James Smith may get the benefit of some kind of Democratic wave.
Do you think so? In the gubernatorial race in South Carolina, does the loss of Catherine Templeton, which was a surprise to some, not surprise to others, the loss of Catherine Templeton in that pre-governor's election, was that surprising to you, and will that allow Henry McMaster to hold on to that office more easily?
Well, I'm not quite sure that Catherine Templeton ran the kind of campaign that people were expecting her to run. At first, she was a representative of the business community in South Carolina, and she was seen as competent, a person who had some experience in the state agencies, but was able to run as an outsider. Mm-hmm. John Warren came in as a true outsider. And Templeton she spent a lot of time trying to run closer to Trump than she probably actually was. And voters saw through that. Henry McMaster could say, he was the first elected representative to back the president. So I think Templeton understood that the party was a Trump party. Mm-hmm. She tried to run closer to the president than she really was. And the voters punished her for not being really a Trump backer.
Linda, we'll bring you into the dialogue. I'm not going to ask you anything about South Carolina politics.
Thank you.
But politics have been, at least in the early summer, have a meaningful impact on business, policy, communities rather. Build North Carolina, Build NC bonds have been were passed by the General Assembly and endorsed by the governor of North Carolina. But many have said, but gosh, you go back to politics, this was not a public referendum. So a couple questions here, Linda. Does the fact that the public didn't have any input on a $3 billion transportation and infrastructure bond package, does that matter? And secondly, kind of connected to it, will that package, as it's being presented now, is it going to supercharge some of these issues around transportation, around infrastructure? Do you feel pretty good about that?
Well, I feel great about it. And I think it was smart for the legislature to go ahead and approve this and get it done without taking it to a referendum. It was just a little over a year ago that the Connect NC bond did go to a referendum, and it did pass. I think going to the voters the next election cycle with another one, while it's important and something they probably wanted, I don't know if there would have been the palate to vote in favor of it. And definitely the infrastructure is something we need. You look at the number of people moving into the state of North Carolina every year, and our infrastructure has fallen behind. And in order to create more jobs and to attract more business and industry into the state, we've got to have the transportation routes and we've got to have the services available. So it's necessary, and I'm glad they did it the way they did.
You're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the treasurer of North Carolina, Dale Folwell's come out to say it's a bad idea not to go to the public with these bonds because of the cost. He said the cost was going to be higher to issue the kind of a structure of debt. And again, I don't want to belabor this issue, but and I don't want to put words in your mouth either, Linda. Are you saying that politically, though, expeditiously, it makes sense to have the General Assembly and the governor to both float this idea and approve this to move the ball down the field, so to speak?
Well, I think the reason I say that, exactly that, is because you've got a governor that's a Democrat and a General Assembly that's Republican. And if they agree on something, I think that's a win to begin with.
Worth celebrating.
And I think the voters would have looked at it probably positively, since both sides seemed in favor of it. So that's why personally, I don't have a problem with how they did that. Brent,
we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to come back to South Carolina as a net exporter of goods and services, certainly heavy manufacturing, autos, and airline. Is there a lot of unease and consternation around any kind of trade dispute that goes on between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we are very exposed to the global economy, and we export a lot through that port in Charleston. And we export automobiles, we export airplanes, we export things that have steel and aluminum in them. And some of that steel and aluminum comes from Europe and from China. And any kind of tariff on those imports will raise the cost of our exports. There also seems to be some prejudice within the administration against cars that are manufactured by foreign entities, like BMW, for instance, and or Volvo, and so the problem is a matter of perception, because of course Americans manufacture those cars, and they are sold in the American market, but more importantly, they are exported to China and to Europe. And any kind of retaliation against American exports will raise the price of those cars as well. It will hurt BMW, it will hurt Boeing, it will hurt these major manufacturers who have invested a lot of money in South Carolina in order to take advantage of our market. But they are importers of parts and services, and if there's a trade war and all of those tariffs go up, South Carolina is very vulnerable to any kind of change in the rules-based global order that we live in now.
But we've seen that there's a pattern with the Trump administration that this is a negotiating tactic to go to, and I call it the nuclear option, and then back off to something more reasonable. Is this a negotiating tactic that might be reduced or maybe even go away? Would you predict that it'll change again?
Well, if I had some sort of door into Donald Trump's mind, I would be, writing best-selling books, and I don't. I don't know whether this is a strategy and he has an end game. See, I think in some ways that's really the point. Does he know what he wants as an end result of all of this? If it is a brilliant negotiating strategy and it ends up with an even freer global trade market, then kudos to him.
Yeah, okay.
But if it ends up in a less secure, less orderly, less rules-based system, then we're going to have a lot of trouble because the stability is what business is built on.
Yeah.
And this is right now a very unstable marketplace.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That'll be the final word. We're going to bring our guest on in just a moment. Next week on this program, he is the Chief Executive Officer of the political system in North Carolina, better known as the governor of the Old North State. His name is Roy Cooper. He has been on our program before. He is back next week. We hope you will mark your calendars and tune in for that. And then also major manufacturer in Fort Mill, South Carolina called Domtar. They are actually Canadian-owned in the U.S. and in South Carolina. The Chief Executive Officer, John Williams, will join us again on this program. There are a few things in life that are more, there are few things in life that are more ubiquitous, important, and ostensibly complex than insurance. Phone insurance, computer insurance, life insurance, health insurance, home insurance, auto insurance, disability insurance, trip insurance, reinsurance, et cetera, et cetera. Joining us again is someone who has so far spent a career delivering insurance. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Columbia-based Colonial Life, Tim Arnold. Tim, welcome back.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you having me back.
You betcha. Tim, I know this is kind of not in your area of dominant influence, but I know you're more than a casual observer of health insurance policy. It seems to be as opaque and as uncertain it was 12 months ago and 24 months ago. Is that the sense? And how long do you think that we're going to have this kind of uncertainty in that?
Yeah, I think it's true, Chris. I think it's even maybe as uncertain as it was 5 years ago. The climate in D.C. is not really being helpful. People haven't figured out how to bend the cost curve for medical costs. Small employers especially are really impacted by this. Employers of all sizes, but small employers especially are impacted. And so they are having to share the costs of medical with their employees, and that creates higher deductibles. It creates an environment where employees struggle to meet those deductibles when something bad happens to them. So companies like ours offer products that help them do that. In my view, there's a lot of opportunity for us to get to a better place. Almost every study you read says that the U.S. is not accomplishing some basic goals like really high quality care at a reasonable price. Other countries are doing better. So there's a real opportunity there for us.
Do you expect there is going to be some sympathy in the cost structure for small business that comes out of this Congress somewhere, somehow?
I think the sentiment's there. I don't know if the solutions are there.
Yeah, okay. Question?
Well put. Well, as Chris mentioned at the top of the show, I'm on the governing board of South Carolina Educational Television, and that is a state agency. And I know that your company works very hard to help state agencies attract the best employees and retain them. And we are very interested in that aspect because we're finding that it is difficult to recruit and retain good employees for state agencies. So what can we do to help our situation?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think there are a couple of things. First, public sector is an area of expertise for us. About 40% of our customers are in the public sector. What we're seeing in the public sector is that the same cost pressures on the medical side that have affected the private sector are now occurring in the public sector. And in the past, the public sector was able to attract and retain employees through very rich benefit packages, and that's more challenging today. And so companies like ours offer products that can help, but more importantly, what we see is that through independent third-party studies, employees who really understand the value of their benefits tend to stay with their employer longer. And so we have 7,500 benefits counselors who can educate people about the value of all their benefits, not just those offered by Colonial Life. And we can give them tools that help them calculate the exact monetary value of their benefits.
Some companies have taken to putting together a report card back to their employees to show them, here's the other benefit you're getting that you don't recognize.
That's exactly right. We can help facilitate that as well. It's really powerful because people don't understand that about 40% of their total income is a benefit.
Well, and it's especially important with millennials and the younger employees you're talking about recruiting and retaining. Part of what inspires them is feeling like the company's investing in them. So to be able to see this investment that's kind of backstage really makes a big impression.
Oh yeah, we're really encouraged. You know, some people believe that employee benefits are not as important to millennials as they are to baby boomers like myself, but we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing that employee benefits are even more important to millennials. And it may be because they watched their parents go through the financial crisis and some of the things that happened around the employment environment there. But we're seeing really good interest on the part of millennials in the things that we manufacture.
You know, Tim, how would you characterize this demographic called millennials? Colonial Life celebrates that you've got a modern workplace, that you've got millennials working, as you just described, the millennial demographic that uses your product. What do you think gets missed in a conversation about this next generation called millennials that really is starting to have some real effect on the economy and this ecosystem that we live in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. I often hear millennials characterized as people who are undisciplined, people who don't really know what they want in life, people who may not value financial security. We're not seeing that. We're actually seeing the opposite. One example is people believe that millennials don't want to learn more or talk to someone who understands financial services, financial protection benefits. But what we're seeing is that millennials may want to do research online on their phone and learn, but then at the point of the transaction, they actually want to be able to speak to someone who's knowledgeable because most of them simply don't really understand the value of benefits or the as you said earlier, the complexities of some of the insurance benefits.
So, but let me, just a quick follow-up, and I promise to give you guys a chance to ask a question. Do millennials, are they part, you know, we call it creative disruption here. We've talked about this a lot. Is that something you embrace, and not just through millennials, but how do you leverage that within Colonial?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We absolutely believe in that. And so we are in the midst of a $24 million renovation of our campus in Columbia, South Carolina. We have about 1,200 people there. And our work environment was like most of others in business, where it's kind of a cube farm environment. We're moving and we're halfway through the process of moving to a very open, collaborative space where people can collide and have those disruptive conversations around what's next and how to solve the opportunities and challenges that are in front of us. So we believe, and the other piece too, and this goes back to your question a little bit, Brent, what we're seeing is that work environment is attracting millennials. So 7 years ago, about 15% of our workforce was what we call millennials today, and today it's about 35%. So having the work environment that millennials appreciate, having an opportunity for them to have a more open and collaborative environment and collaborate with each other and collide with each other is certainly something that we see of value.
Right.
I actually work with millennials all the time. My students never get older than 22 years old. So, and I think if there's one thing I would underline, it's that for those of us who are in the baby boomer generation, we sort of believe that millennials are, we can't connect with them. that they're distant from us. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are on their phones a lot. There's no denying that. But I have found that millennials are just as eager to get to know someone personally, and you do sometimes have to just reach through the phone and connect with them personally, and then you'll find that they are just as ambitious, just as eager to work. They might have a different sense of when they work and how they work, but they will work just as hard as anyone else. And so it's a matter of harnessing that and making that personal connection. And then I think you'll find.
Is there a question in there, Brent?
It was just a contribution to I think, what was really good.
I would follow up on that. I think it's a great point. And one of the things that we're doing to do exactly what you just described is what we call reverse mentoring. So that people like myself and the baby boomer generation actually are mentored by a millennial to understand more about how they view the world, how they're thinking about problem solving, how they're thinking about serving our customers. It's really kind of cool. And they're pushing us in terms of the way we think about technology as an enabler. It's a great experience.
Linda?
I had a question kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, opposite of millennials. You've got about 10,000 boomers a day turning 65. How is that reshaping some of your products or services? And then kind of factoring in, you've got the millennials servicing that group. How do you harness all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I think it's important for the viewers to hear the preface to that question again. 10,000 boomers per day are retiring. That's significant. And I think retirement readiness is a real issue in our country. You see many statistics that suggest that people just aren't financially ready for retirement. And so we don't manufacture retirement insurance products, but I think there's more for the industry to do to work in a private-public partnership, and there's a lot of work going on in D.C. and in state governments around how to make sure that we create better retirement readiness. So that's one issue that we're probably not as involved in. But our company, like many, until recently, offered products that tended to stop when someone reached retirement age. And now many of our products and products in the industry are effective for people up until age 80. The second half of your questions are a really interesting one too, which is how do you get people who are millennials working in the environment, serving people who are retirees? And what we emphasize are the things that we know that both people are, or both groups are interested in. Both groups are interested in human connections. Both groups are interested in solving problems. Both groups are interested in serving others. And so that's one of the many great things about millennials. They are attracted to a workplace where they believe that there's a social purpose, and we offer that.
We've got about 3 minutes left, Tim. I want to come back to something regional in Columbia and the Midlands. You are on the Midland Leaders Business Forum, MBLF. And it's really taking a heart, and I'm telling you what your job is on this, but I'm trying to make a point of this. This Midland Leaders Business Forum taking a hard look at the future of Columbia and the Midlands and why it hasn't grown like the upstate, like Charleston, like Charlotte, like Raleigh-Durham. What are the dialogues, and how far is this group going to go to figure out what it's going to take to grow Lexington, Richland counties in those areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of really good work being done by the Midlands Business Leadership Group and also by Lexington County Chamber of Commerce. I was with Odie Rawls earlier this week, and he was talking about great things that they're doing over there in Lexington County. Lexington County is actually one of the fastest growing counties in South Carolina, which is one of the fastest growing states. So that's something that they could be proud of. The work that the Midlands Business Leadership Group is doing, led by David Pankow over at Blue Cross Blue Shield and Luke Kennedy over at Nephron, is very holistic in thinking about how to promote economic development in the city of Columbia. We're beginning to see some really encouraging signs. If you drive down Main Street, it looks a lot different than it did just 7 years ago, and there are a lot of new businesses coming into town. Richland County itself is growing, but much of that growth is occurring out in the suburbs. I'm encouraged by the holistic plan that the group has put together, and I believe if we can get some additional community support for that plan, we'll see really good things happen.
Do you feel like there's going to be some frank, hard looks at where the structure is now and where it ought to be?
I do. I think there's more work to do on that, but we are beginning to have those conversations, and I feel good about the direction. I feel great about the leadership.
Yeah.
I think good things are going to happen.
Okay, we have less than a minute left. Do you think you can get a question in there in about a minute?
Well, I wanted to go back to what Chris was talking about, healthcare in this country, and it seems like we are moving more in a direction of some kind of worker-based benefits rather than employer-based. So the benefits follow the workers. Do you see that? And do you think that Colonial Life gets on board with that kind of?
In 20 seconds.
Yeah, we do. The workplace is the most popular place for people in the United States to buy benefits. Most of our benefits are offered on an independent or an individual basis, so people could take them with them where they go. There's a lot more work to do for the industry to ensure that the benefits are attached to the person and not their employer.
Yeah, nicely done. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nice to see you, Tim. Good to have you here, Linda. Always nice to see you. Brent, thank you for being here. Come back, please.
My pleasure, and I will.
Thank you for watching our program. Till next week, I'm Chris William. We hope your summer weekend is good, and your businesses too. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.